Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Peatlands Gathering event at the Peatlands Pavilion COP26. My name is Catherine Farrell. I'm a peatland ecologist. I started working on restoring very badly degraded peatlands in the west of Ireland way back in 1996. And I'm happy to say I never looked back. And since then, I've been working to restore peatlands, but also to highlight the hidden values of our peatlands, both in Ireland and globally. Having worked with the Irish Peat Company, Bord na Mónas, from 2001 to 2019, I'm now working on ways to develop and apply natural capital accounting tools in Ireland in order to build a greater recognition of the role that nature plays for society and economy, but equally to get the support and recognition, which also means the finance, to get peatlands and nature back in good health to address the global climate and biodiversity crisis that we're facing. As part of that, this time last year, it became clear that while there was an increasing awareness of the values of peatlands, equally there were a number of mixed messages around peatlands. So we needed to bring the community together to share and exchange knowledge. The Peatlands Gathering was born of that thought. And over the course of the year, it developed into an absolutely fantastic event to showcase Irish peatlands at the start of the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. And equally in this, the year of COP15 on biodiversity and COP26 on climate action. So we wanted to highlight the role of peatlands in climate and biodiversity, and their role in providing sustainable livelihoods for those who rely on peatlands and who are living in those landscapes. We thought the best way was by engaging stakeholders from all areas of interest in a positive engagement for knowledge exchange and for collective learning. It was organised by an absolutely stellar group of volunteers from agencies and institutes across Ireland, and some of these wonderful people you're going to get to meet today. Together, we succeeded in bringing together one of the most diverse sets of peatland stakeholder groups yet in Ireland. We held it back in early October. We had over 500 registered participants, 2 days of online activities, and then field trips across 9 counties on the Saturday. And all content and contributions are available from our website. So this morning we present a flavour of that event, and we have a lineup with contributions from 2 of our ministers. That's followed by a wonderful presentation by the artist Tina Claffy to present Irish peatlands to the world and really show you how inspiring they are. That will be followed by contributions from a panel of peatland specialists in Ireland. And then we'll have a response from Deputy Brian Ledden, Chair of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action in Ireland. And just to say that just last week, we launched the updated Climate Action Plan, which is available online. I was very heartened to see over 200 mentions of peatlands. So we can really say for sure that peatlands are starting to gather momentum. So we're going to hear some important facts and figures this morning, but really this is a call to action for peatlands in Ireland. Ireland is a global hotspot for peatlands with over 20% peatland and peat soil cover. All peatland types in Ireland are reported in bad condition nationally, and that is since the reporting began under the EU Habitats Directive in 2007. That means that we have a lot of degraded peatlands. These are sources of carbon and they are contributing to climate warming. Equally, these degraded peatlands are having a negative effect on water quality and flows and biodiversity, and they are not supporting sustainable livelihoods. This time last year, I was standing on a hillside in Donegal watching a river of peat flowing down a mountain after a bog slide. That was one of 3 known bog slides where we lost significant stores of carbon with detrimental effects on freshwater habitats. And just last spring, we had extensive fires across dried out peatlands and adjoining old oak forests in Killarney National Park, with devastating consequences for wildlife. It's time to get our peatlands back up and running, back to health, so that nature and people can thrive in these areas. It's time for a new beginning for Irish peatlands. And this isn't just the message from Ireland. This same message is reflected in the headline items of the UNEP report launched last week, The Economics of Peatlands Conservation, Restoration and Sustainable Management. And those headline items are, and I paraphrase, peatlands are in decline. Peatland restoration delivers a triple win for people, the climate and biodiversity. Peatlands are undervalued and underinvested, and we must end that undervaluing and the underfunding of peatlands. And we must align our work across nations, and that means we need a global strategy for peatlands. So with that in mind, welcome to the Peatlands Gathering event at the Peatlands Pavilion, COP26. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share our wonderful peatlands with the world. And thanks to all those who worked so hard to bring this Peatlands Pavilion initiative to light. And I'll now introduce Minister Malcolm Newman. So Minister Newman is a TD representing Carlow Kilkenny constituency. He was appointed as Minister of State for Heritage and Electoral Reform in July 2020. Malcolm holds qualifications in industrial design, a BA in rural development, and is currently working towards an MA in international development. And I'm glad to say that prior to entering politics, he was involved in environmental and community activism as a director and national coordinator with Friends of the Earth Ireland. So thank you, Malcolm.
Margaret Catherine, and it's great to be here this morning. It's more an honour of it on show. I got Molly and show on shot custom. Balliaha Clia, I got no call to show. August cop fishe. It's a great honour to be here from Dublin, from the Custom House, and I will be joining COP26 in Glasgow on Friday. So I hope to meet some of you over the course of our time there. At the last Peatlands Gathering, which was held in Ireland just last month, we discussed the important work being done to protect, enhance, restore and rehabilitate Ireland's peatlands, and how we together with our many stakeholders are striving towards a shared plan for their future. The ambition underpinning these efforts is driven by the unprecedented urgency that has now been felt all across Ireland, in our communities, our schools and universities, our places of work, and indeed our government, to take action on the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Last month, I took part in COP15 virtually in Kunming in China, and this week I'm here at COP26. These global events address the two most significant challenges humanity faces in the 21st century. These problems are interconnected, and so too are their solutions. This fact is especially evident when we think about peatlands. In Ireland, we have a newly established National Climate Action Plan that is putting us on the right path to meet our climate goals. We have already enacted legislation to put a legally binding emissions reduction target of 51% below 2018 levels by 2030, and we aim to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Integral to Ireland's reduction in greenhouse gas targets is the restoration and rehabilitation of our peatlands in reducing, and in the future, hopefully preventing, the release of carbon emissions into our atmosphere. In this, the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, Ireland is amplifying the message that bogs and wetlands offer highly effective nature-based solutions to the ecological, hydrological, and climate challenges that we are facing. The multiple values of healthy peatland ecosystems must be heard clearly, not just in Ireland or across Europe, but globally. Their role in carbon sequestration, improved water quality, and increased biodiversity cannot be overstated. But there's another facet of their significance for Irish people. Bogs are integral to our national cultural heritage, to our sense of place, and to our identity. They are embedded in our psyche through archaeology, history, myth, music, and in place names. The upland blanket bogs of the Northwest have preserved the underlying Neolithic landscape of the Caja Fields, almost 6,000 years old, older than the pyramids, along with settlements of all periods under mountain peat from County Kerry in the southwest to County Donegal in the north. In the great raised bogs of the Midlands region, palisaded houses, wooden roadways or towers, hunting platforms, all manner of organic items, totems, bog butter, wooden vessels, clothing, and almost 140 enigmatic bog bodies have been recorded. With the cessation of peat extraction by Bord na Móna, one of Ireland's commercial semi-state energy bodies, we now have the opportunity to preserve the remaining archaeology on an extensive scale in situ, in accordance with our national archaeological policy. The National Peatland Strategy is the cornerstone of Ireland's peatlands policy. The strategy, which is currently being reviewed, aims to provide a long-term framework within which all of the peatlands of the state can be managed responsibly in order to optimise their social, environmental and economic contribution to the well-being of this and future generations, in conjunction with the objectives set out in Ireland's National Biodiversity Strategy and the Climate Action Plan. While these strategies and policies are essential in providing framework for the restoration and rehabilitation of our national bogs, I truly believe that local communities and volunteers are the custodians of our heritage into the future, and this must be supported in their efforts to help achieve our national conservation and climate action goals. There are many examples, not least the amazing locally led Abbeyleix Bog Project and the Ballydangan Bog Project, which you will be hearing more about shortly from David Fallon, and the exemplary work of the Community Wetlands Forum, which supports community groups who are engaged in wetlands conservation. I'm delighted to be able to announce today that I'm doubling funding for the forum this year so that they may continue to support communities in a meaningful way and grow the momentum for local stewardship for peatlands across Ireland. From the experience of my department, we know it is crucial that the government helps and supports community projects to achieve their objective to support climate action by restoring ecological function, enhance biodiversity, and make space for nature, and create beautiful, accessible public amenities that bring people together once again to enjoy these treasured landscapes. I consider that it is essential that we engage and collaborate with all stakeholders equally as we seek to create a pathway to expand bog restoration and rehabilitation nationally. In October, I spoke to you all about the work being carried out by my department directly, and I'll briefly outline this again. We have our own Bog Restoration Program to restore raised bogs of special areas of conservation. Our various life projects, including the locally led Wild Atlantic Nature Life Integrated Project, which is working with communities to change the management of upland bogs. Our work as regulators on the Enhanced Decommissioning, Rehabilitation and Restoration Scheme operated by Bord na Móna on 30,000 hectares of post-production peatlands, and our partnership with Intel to restore the blanket bogs of Wicklow Mountains National Park. As Ireland undertakes these projects, they build on the already significant expertise of our scientists and all who work in this sector. With support from the European Investment Bank Natural Capital Financing Facility, my department is also investigating options for mobilising blended finance for peatland restoration. We are exploring the development and the incorporation of an Irish peatland code that would create a suitable framework for engaging the private sector to invest in peat restoration and related emissions reductions in Ireland. This would require the development of transparent accounting rules while offering the private sector an efficient framework to engage. The ambition is to build a model that will bring on board business, landowners and local communities to drive restoration at a landscape scale and to work towards achieving our biodiversity, climate, water and our just transition targets. Here at COP26, as part of the Global Peatlands Pavilion Programme, it's an ideal forum for the discussion that we will be having this morning. I know that nationally we are building great momentum in peatland conservation, restoration and rehabilitation, and for this we owe a huge debt of gratitude to all who share this effort with us. We must all strive to collaborate nationally across Europe and around the world in a spirit of collaboration, curiosity and collective endeavour to increase this momentum for the benefit of people, nature and climate. I look forward to the deliberations this morning and a really positive engagement, and hope to see some of you over the course of the next few days. Birch Marigold.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Minister. And I really want to welcome that announcement about the doubling of the funding for the Community Wetlands Forum. Having worked with them for the last number of years, that will be more than the sum of its parts, because that can be help to extend their work right across Ireland. So that's really welcome news. Thank you so much. And now I want to introduce Minister Hackett. So unfortunately, Minister Hackett has another engagement. She can't be with us. but she has given us a video to present. Pippa Hackett is Minister of State for Agriculture, responsibility for land use and biodiversity. Again, she was appointed to this role in June 2020. She holds a BSc in Agriculture, a postgraduate diploma from University College Dublin, and a PhD from the University of Limerick. A former member of Offaly County Council, she got my vote, I have to say, in the last election, and a champion of organic farming in Ireland. So I'm going to ask our organisers here to play the video of Pippa.
Hello, I'm delighted to join you today for this event, and I'd like to thank the organisers for providing me with the opportunity to participate in this discussion. This event highlights the important role that we all have to play in combating the challenge of climate change, and how the protection of peatlands has such an important part to play in this challenge. While it is estimated that peatlands currently cover as little as 3% of the global land surface, they are responsible for up to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions from the land use sector, mainly as a result of drainage for agricultural and forestry purposes. And as we know, despite this small area, peatlands are also the largest land-based carbon store we have, representing 42% of all soil carbon. Ireland has a particular interest in peat soils, especially those under agricultural management, as these represent between 7 and 9% of all our agricultural area, and as such have a considerable impact on the total emissions from the sector. Recent Irish research has shown high levels of greenhouse gas emissions of up to 37 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per hectare are attributable to organic soils under agricultural management in Ireland, and this has been recognised nationally in both the Programme for Government and the All-of-Government Climate Action Plan. However, in order to implement the correct policies to reduce or eliminate these emissions, we need to identify where these soils are and how they can be managed. To address this, my Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine has funded 2 European Innovation Partnership projects, not only to provide necessary location data, but also to explore how farmer engagement in reduced management activities can be maximised. The first of these projects is called Farm Peat and aims to address specific agricultural actions in the Climate Action Plan, mainly the reduced management of intensity of up to 80,000 hectares of peat-based agricultural soils. It will also develop a template which will aim to develop a results-based agri-environmental model for organic soils under agricultural management, while also assisting farmers and the broader community to transition towards a more sustainable use of the peatland resource in their area through a range of educational tools and peer mentoring. The second project, called Repeat, will use innovative mapping tools to transform 100-year-old maps to digital format to better inform and target our actions on these carbon-rich soils for the delivery of the LULUCF flexibility. We are also heavily investing in our establishing baseline carbon data on our farms. This has been delivered via a pilot soil sampling and analysis programme, which will not only provide soil nutrient analysis details for up to 10,000 farmers, but it will also provide nationwide soil carbon analysis, while also further identifying peat soils on farms across the country. Another significant development which DAFM has recently funded is the establishment of a National Agricultural Soil Carbon Observatory, which involves placing carbon flux towers for the measurement of a range of greenhouse gases on a variety of soil types, including peat soils. This initiative will inform government decisions for future land use options as set out under the Land Use Review commitment given in the Programme for Government. It is also worth noting that these towers will be located on signpost farms, which is an initiative supported through DAFM funding, where farms representing a variety of soil types and farm enterprises will act as demonstration models, thereby giving farmers relatable information on climate-friendly actions which they can implement on their own farms. We do, however, face challenges in our national efforts to protect peat soils. One such challenge is to ensure that peatland areas are not only recognised for the contribution that their protection will make to our climate change targets, but also to ensure that they deliver for ecosystem services such as water retention and purification, biodiversity and an important amenity value. These are really important aspects for our future. To fully recognise that range of ecosystems that peat soils provide, we do perhaps need to place an economic value on these benefits. As a result, the Central Statistics Office has been working to put in place a framework of economic values which will in time lead to the development of internationally recognised natural capital accounting systems for peatlands. This will raise the possibility of financially rewarding farmers for these ecosystem benefits, which will have significant environmental and social implications. Likewise, work has begun within DAFM to consider the area of carbon farming and how this innovation can be utilised to reward farmers to engage in carbon sequestration and storage-friendly management practices. We have set ourselves a massive challenge of reducing the management intensity in up to 80,000 hectares of agriculturally managed organic soils. Early adoption of these reduced management activities is needed, however, for Ireland to meet its emissions reductions targets. And I'm confident that through proactive engagement activities and knowledge transfer with farmers and farming communities, a pathway can be found to allay farmers' fears while also providing environmental gains for the sector. We also have a number of legacy issues associated with historic afforestation, which were planted in sensitive areas that need to be addressed. Through the important EU LIFE project, Ireland has remediated a number of important designated sites, such as raised and blanket bogs, and we will examine other areas for restoration in the future. Future afforestation must not impact these important habitats, and we must learn from the past. In conclusion, I hope the activities that my government has initiated in recent months can act as a testbed for other countries to assess how policy options can be used to protect our valuable peat soils, and to inform farmers and the wider agricultural sector on not only the economic benefits but also the environmental and social benefits of protecting this valuable resource. In conclusion, I want to wish you a constructive and fruitful engagement this morning, and I want to express my sincere thanks to you for asking me to speak at your event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hackett. And so I think Minister Hackett really highlighted a number of, the issues that we have and the pressures that peatlands face in Ireland. You're going to be hearing about some of those from our specialists. But next we want to go over to Tina Claffy. Tina, I'd like to invite you to begin sharing your screen. Tina Claffy is an award-winning Irish nature photographer, and we're delighted to have her here. She is author of Tapestry of Light, Ireland's Bogs and Wetlands as Never Seen Before, which was published in 2017. Her observations and unique perspective of the flora and fauna of the raised bogs and wet woodlands of the Irish Midlands are celebrated in her work. So Tina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted and honoured to be here today as part of the wonderful Irish Peatland Gathering at the Peatland Pavilion at COP26. I'm an Irish nature photographer, and I've been fascinated with the living tapestry of flora and fauna of our bogs and wetlands for over 10 years now. I specialise in macro photography, which is extreme close-up photography. This allows me to capture the tiny wonders within the bog's living carpet that can easily be passed by unseen. I'd like to take you on a visual journey this morning and share some of the wonders of this ancient wilderness with you all. So this is sphagnum moss. And without sphagnum moss, we would have no bogs, forming the living surface of this magical carpet and holding up to 20 times their own weight in water. These beautiful mosses also host the bog's plants and tiny fauna. There are so many species, each one a wonder to look at through the macro lens. This is frog spawn, the first signs of life in the spring. The sun was shining and lit a reed below the surface, illuminating one cell of frog spawn. As I looked through the lens, it appeared as if an eye was looking directly back at me. One of the first flowers to appear in the spring is beautiful Marsh Marigold. The arrival of this flower is a godsend to the emerging spring insects. It's hard to believe that an insect created this amazing structure. This Caddisfly Larva is an accomplished architect. It builds this structure from reeds which house its delicate aquatic larval body. This creation protects it from predators as it develops, and its weight keeps it submerged. This caddisfly has gained its wings, leaving its house behind. This little beauty is bog bean and can be found in the shallow bog pools. Its petals are fringed with long white hairs and are a joy to see through the macro lens. Horsetail is an amazing vascular plant whose ancestors date back to the time of the dinosaurs 100 million years ago. This beauty is emerging from the bog pool, towering over the beautiful and very aptly named bog beacon fungi as the sun illuminates its yellow tips. So tiny, but so regal, this is a micro moth. I imagine that he's a king in the winged world, his regal wings like a cape, and his furry crown and that scarlet red eye looking back at me. This dark tussock moth caterpillar was feeding on bog cotton. I was fascinated by its little feet as it moved up and down the stalk of the plant. I couldn't believe my eyes when I peered through the macro lens at this tiny fleck on the bog pool. These tiny mating snails were oblivious to me watching them. And this is the round-leaved sundew. The sundew would be my favorite plant on the bog, and it really is a stunning example of how many species have adapted to survive in the sterile conditions in the bog. This beauty is a deadly carnivore. It's attracted to its sweet, sticky tentacles, and once they land on it, they're doomed. The tentacles close over the insect, and the sundew receives the nitrogen it needs. This is a different type of sundew. This is a great sundew, or long-leaved sundew. Poised like a cobra, this beauty appeared to me like it was just about to strike my lens at any moment. The Bog Asphodel is like a chameleon in the bog, and a sign that summer has arrived here. It completely transforms its color throughout the seasons. This is its summer form, when to me it's at its most beautiful. And this is the raft spider, and the raft spider is our largest spider. It doesn't spin webs to capture its prey. It's semi-aquatic, hunting on and under the water. This is a female carrying her precious cargo, her egg sac. She carries it for up to 3 weeks, then finds a safe spot for it, lays it down, and builds a small web around it, guarding them until they emerge. This otherworldly creature is the caterpillar of the sallow kitten moth. To the naked eye, it looks like a tiny curled up leaf, but only the macro lens could really reveal its identity. This marsh fritillary butterfly had just emerged and was drying its wings. This allowed me to get as close as possible to observe the wonderful tapestry of its wing and its wonderful structure. I was deep in thought photographing this freshly emerged female emperor moth when she was joined by a much smaller male. Freshly emerged females release a unique chemical signature, a pheromone that's irresistible to males. The male can detect her from kilometers away. I felt so privileged to witness this rarely seen event. The iconic bog cotton bobs and sways in the summer breeze as the hot sun retreats at the end of the day in high summer. Early autumn really is a magical time to be on the bog as the heather comes into bloom. A sea of purple awaits you at this magical time of the year. This tiny lichen could hardly be seen by the naked eye, but what a treat when viewed through the lens up close. The morning dew had encapsulated its orange tip, creating this otherworldly orb of dew. Standing tall and regal, loosestrife is a royal beauty, captured here in the setting sun. It's hard to believe that nature could produce such an incredible colour as that of the green elf cup. It's neither green nor blue, but a combination of both. I found this beauty on rotted wood in the wet woodlands. And this is Bog Asphodel in the autumn. It's unrecognisable as it transforms to its autumnal phase, its deep orange fruiting body framed by the blooming heather. Devil's Bit scabious explodes into bloom in the autumn when most other flowers retreat. An important nectar-rich flower for the remaining insects, such as this one. This is the Birch Shield Bug. And you can tell how the shield bug gets its name. Its back resembles a knight's shield. This birch shield bug was heavily covered in morning dew and looked like its shield was encrusted with jewels. This tiny white reindeer lichen looked to me like an enchanted ghostly tree from another world. Bracken Fern turns from greens in spring, gold and deep orange in the autumn, receding in a blaze of glory in the evening sun. And this is Devil's Matchstick lichen, famous for its scarlet red tips. I singled out this beauty on a frosty morning as it looked like a lone tree in the frosted lunar landscape. As I explored the bog in midwinter, a tiny sphagnum moss caught my eye as the sun lit up the ice in a shallow bog pool. When I looked through the lens, it truly took my breath away. The frozen sphagnum was perfectly preserved in the ice, as if in suspended animation, surrounded by a galaxy of tiny frozen oxygen bubbles. This is my book, Tapestry of Light, which is now sold out. I'm delighted to be able to say that. And I have a new book coming out next year, and it will be launched in the autumn of 2022. The book Tapestry of Light, the name came from John Sheehan's poems, which are infused throughout the book. And yeah, I'm looking forward to working on my new book. And these are my contact details, all of my social media handles, along with my website. And if you go onto my website, you can get on my mailing list and I'll keep you informed about my new book. And I've put in a quotation at the bottom: "Adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience," by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's very apt for me because patience, it's all about patience, really, at the end of the day out there, especially with the macro lens. And it's only when you slow down to the pace of nature that nature truly reveals itself. So thank you very much. An absolute honor to be here, and I look forward to the panelist discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's just truly amazing to watch those images, and it really reminds me that there's a whole world going on the peatlands when we're scurrying around doing our business, and we really need to keep those things in mind. The small things matter, they really do. I'm delighted now to hand over. We're going to have our panel of contributions. I have to say it's going to be a whirlwind. We're already behind time, so I think it is a whirlwind. So welcome to Dr. John Conley. John is a geographer at Trinity College Dublin, a really important discipline when we talk about peatlands in terms of mapping them and understanding them. John has been working on mapping this work, extent and condition in Ireland since 2001. So John, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. It's an honour to be here at the Peatland Pavilion at COP26. My work is mapping peatlands in Ireland, and I'm going to go through a really quick tour of those mapping products. So our story begins of mapping peatlands in Ireland in the early 19th century with the Bog Commissioners' maps. These maps were produced by a group of 50 surveyors who came over from England to map the peatlands in Ireland with the aim of converting them to productive land. And the outcome of that was the Bog Commissioners' maps that you can see in the top left-hand corner there of the screen. In the 1970s and early 80s, Bob Hammond from Unforest Tuluntus, which is now Tragus, produced the Peatland Map of Ireland, which you can see there, a beautiful map showing the extent of peatlands across the island. And in 2009, myself and Nick Holden produced the derived Irish peat map. Once we had produced this map showing the peatland extent in Ireland, we were able to use that data to look inside those maps and look at the condition and land use of peatlands across Ireland. So in 2018, I produced a land use map that obviously looks at land use on peatlands. And this map, we're in the process of updating this map, myself and my PhD student, Wahaj Habib, as part of the Smart Bog, the EPA-funded Smart Bog project. These data, the derived Irish peat map, have also been used to aid the modelling of carbon stock on blanket bogs in Ireland, and that work is currently in preparation. We've also dived in deeper, and our aim is to refine the information that we have for Irish peatlands. And part of that refining takes place in several projects. So the first is the EPA Smart Bog project, where we're mapping drained peatlands across an extent of 6,500 square kilometres of raised bogs in Ireland. The second project is the EPA-funded iHabimap project, where we're using UAVs to create very high-resolution habitat maps of upland peat bogs in the east of Ireland, in the Wicklow Mountains, and in the southwest, down in the Slieve Mish Mountains. And we're also using these data, these high-resolution, very refined data sets, to help to look at another project, an EPA-funded, NPWS-funded project called the Irish Peatland Resilience Project. And that project will be coming online in January 2022. And at this stage, we go back in time to where we began with the Bog Commissioner's Map. We have a very exciting project that was mentioned by Minister Hackett, where it's a DAFM and EPA-funded project, where we're going to take the Bog Commissioner's maps that we have. They're very accurate maps. We're going to take those and we're going to digitize those maps. They're going to form baseline data. Those maps were created before the widespread degradation of Irish peatlands. And we're going to use those maps to look at long-term land use change over a 200+ year period, and also to look at the re-wetting potential of areas that were formerly peatland, as you can see in the map, that are now agricultural areas. And we're going to look at to see where those areas occur right across Ireland. And that's kind of where we are at the moment with mapping Irish peatlands. So thank you all very much for listening to this whirlwind tour. And thanks, Catherine.
No, thank you, John. And it's so important to get the mapping right, because we need to know where the peatlands are, and equally we need to know where the carbon stocks are if we want to do proper carbon accounting and management. I'm going to hand over to David Fallon now. It's a great pleasure. I worked with David for 10 years in Bord na Móna. He's a peatland ecologist. He's working now on the Ballydangan Community Bog Project, where the preservation of species of conservation concern, bog protection and education is absolutely paramount. So welcome, David.
Thank you very much, everybody. So just a whirlwind tour of everything that's been happening in Ballydangan since 2009. So I have to acknowledge David Scallon and Pat Fehley, and lots of other people who have worked with us along the way before I start as well. So you can see here in 2009, we got off the ground and the local community came together and they said, look, we're faced into a local extinction here of red grouse and curlew and other birds. They could see the decline. The local community lived around the bog. They saw this. The real decline started, they say, in the 1980s when the bog was intensively drained. So they came together and we always formed a group and said, look, we could do something for this. So it was really pioneering the work here. So there's 3 bogs in total in Ballydangan, and it makes up a total area of 660 hectares. So it's a really big area. It's a really big body of work that has to be done on the bog. Every single day there's something being done there. So since the inception, since the start of the project, lots of groups working together. And I think that's one of the great successes of the group. So the Department of Social Protection are hugely instrumentational on the day-to-day running of the bog. The NARGC, the County Council, the Heritage Council, National Parks and Wildlife Service and Board Mona, all working together to get results here with the community. And the decisions come from the community, so it's coming from the ground up. So in 2013, all the projects, all the drains on the bog were blocked with project in conjunction with the community and Board Mona. So thousands of peat dams were built on the site. And so this was hugely beneficial to the ground nesting birds. So huge knock-on effects for especially ground nesting birds, curlew, red grouse and meadow pipit. The project is also very inclusive, so we're working with everybody. Education is key in the project. We bring children out on the site. We show them what's going on. We tell them why the bog is important. They bring that message home to the parent. What's common is a turf cutting area. Conservation is a new concept on the bogs. So we're talking to them, sending the message home and making sure they have a good day on the bog. So in 2021, where are we at since 2009? The time has flown. So conservation highlights include red grouse. We still have them. We avoided that local extinction on site. Curlew are breeding on site. We've chicks fledged this year, eight pairs on the site. So 10 to 12% of the national population, which is a sad figure, but we're holding our birds and we're building on them as well. Other birds then have benefited: short-eared owl, snipe, merlin, otter as well, using the site. And so into the future then, where are we facing? Threats there include turf cutting, funding. We can never have enough funding. Trespass, dumping, all the usual stuff that affects our bogs. We're working with those and we're applying for new funding, and we're really hoping that through the National Parks and Wildlife working with us, that we'll be able to extend our work onto other sites in the area. So there's a group of bogs about 4 kilometres as the grouse flies away from us with breeding curlew present on site. So we would aim to expand and use the techniques we've developed on Ballydangan, move them across there. So my main message to take home from here is peatlands, we can't restore them, we can't look after them without the community. The community are key and fundamental there, and decisions have to be at ground level and work with people on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thanks a million, David. And just, it just shows the enthusiasm and the power. You can stop sharing there, David, and we're going to ask Paul to start sharing his slides. But the enthusiasm is so important, and to consider that 10 to 12% of the national breeding population of curlew is on that site is just staggering. And hats off to all the local lads there. I know them, they're a great gang. So I want to welcome now Professor Paul Johnston, Adjunct Professor of Environmental Engineering and Wetland Hydroecology at Trinity College Dublin, and just a great champion of peatlands throughout his career. So thank you so much, Paul, for joining us.
Good morning from Clara Bog. Clara Bog is not far from Ballydangan, and indeed some of the pictures from Tina Claffy came from Clara Bog. But Clara Bog has been a focus of research and collaboration for over 40 years. It is a registered bog under the Ramsar Convention. The International Ramsar Convention is also an SAC. It's a raised bog. It's a peatland, of course, but it's a raised bog. And the focus of all the research with the collaborators from both the Netherlands, the UK, as well as in Ireland here, has been to try and figure out how the bog functions. How does it tick, so to speak? And what makes it work, which of course has led on in recent times to the strategies for bog restoration and rewetting. But bogs, like other wetlands, really retain their water in pockets in the landscape. That's really what a bog, or at least a wetland, is. And it's the dynamics of that retention, how long the water stays in that pocket, in that wetland, that dictates its ecology and that hugely diverse set of ecologies that you've seen in the pictures. But it also is responsible for the ways in which a wetland will store carbon, which is the focus of the interest in recent times. In the case of Clara, which is an example of raised bogs throughout the Midlands of Ireland, the principal source of the water, of course, is from rain. And when we start to look at the key characteristics of a bog, then the first thing that occurs to you, of course, just like any wetland, is the bog has to be wet. The key question, which has occupied us for many years, is how wet? How wet does the bog have to be in order to sustain the characteristic ecology and so on? Well, after many years of working in the Midlands and in other wetlands, not just Clara, the importance of retaining the moisture in the bog has become paramount. And one of the key determining parameters, if you like, for retaining not only the vegetation to produce the peat and sustain the dynamics of the bog is that the water level has to be within 10 centimeters or so of the surface of the bog at least 90% of the time. So a stable water level is key to all of the functioning of the bog. But, and this is an important but it has to be in balance with the hydrology of the surrounding area. In other words, what we found, not with all bogs and wetlands, but certainly with many of them, is that the surrounding hydrology, that is the groundwater in the regional area, has a role to play as well. It doesn't feed the bog, but it does help to support the hydrology and therefore the ecology of the bogs themselves. So the right hydrological regime is critical to the hydrology, and it really has a fundamental role in not only causing, if you like, or resulting from climate change, but it's critical to the strategies for sustaining a bog and sustaining its role in climate change. So the challenge, if you like, to design appropriate measures for re-wetting and restoration of bogs, which is where the focus has come in recent times, is to be very aware of the needs of the hydrology and to measure and to assess the hydrological regime by measuring in the field and then designing your strategies to try and conserve and promote and sustain the ecology that rests upon it. In short, look after the hydrology and the ecology will respond.
Thank you, Paul. And I love the way people who really know peatlands can actually distill the wisdom into a short message. And we often hear from their Greifswald colleagues that peatlands must be wet. And I think you've posed the question, how wet? You know, so that's the next challenge. And we're going to hear now from Lawrence Gill. So we're still in the hydrological area and theme. So Lawrence, if you can turn on your, have you slides to share, Lawrence? Yeah? No, well, that's even better. We're going to hand over to Lawrence and hear his wisdom.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. And what I'm going to do is I've got two key messages. One is the importance of hydrology, very much echoing what Paul has just said, and the other is the use of remote sensing in being able to monitor the long-term health of these types of ecosystems. So, I mean, clearly the hydrology is absolutely fundamental in establishing and maintaining the ecology and therefore the biodiversity of these different peatlands. And as Paul has mentioned, the peat-forming vegetation, the sphagnum, requires saturated conditions for most of the year. So we need to understand how rainfall moves through these systems when it falls onto the bogs, onto the wetlands, and how it moves across, how easily it moves, what constrains the flow mechanisms to maintain these types of saturated conditions. So the hydrology regulates the ecology, and that also regulates things like greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. So different vegetation will take up or release different amounts of carbon. That's one aspect. Equally, the water level, as it changes in these wetland systems, by changing, will expose, water level going down will expose peat to oxygen, and that will release carbon dioxide. And then the third aspect linked to the hydrology is how much carbon is leaving these systems in the water that runs off the bog. And we're involved in a project that's going to be mentioned and has been mentioned called the Smart Bog Project to try to quantify that. So this concept of being able to define eco-hydrological metrics is very important. How long and at what depth does the water table need to be to maintain different types of vegetation? And that's very much what we've been doing in environmental engineering here in Trinity for the last few years, evaluating different wetland types and trying to put these metrics together. I mean, and this is very important, particularly to maintain healthy systems, but also if we're going to re-wet and re-establish, hopefully, living bogs again that are going to sequester carbon and produce biodiversity, then we need to know what are we aiming for in these hydrological regimes. And unfortunately, I would say there's very few graduates coming out of university at the moment with these skill sets. And to partly address this, in Trinity, we just started a new 5-year course, environmental science and engineering, trying to combine this, to produce graduates with these types of skills to answer this type of challenge and other challenges, environmental challenges and sustainability challenges coming down the line. There's been a focus here on bogs, raised bogs, and that they're not the only type of peatland. Recently, we've been doing a lot of work on fens in Ireland. So Ireland is underlain by a lot of limestone, and this karstified limestone provides water source directly into these other types of wetland systems, which do produce peat as well. So I'm pointing in the right direction. There's an example of the water coming up from the groundwater up into the fen, and these areas cover 22,000 hectares of Ireland. They have a very one thing we found is that they have a very important role in terms of cleaning the groundwater. So the groundwater has nutrients in from, say, agricultural activities. As it comes into the fen, the wetland acts to actually clean and up these nutrients. And then the final point is the use of remote sensing, as was alluded to by John earlier. So we've been using various satellite images and methodologies to be able to define different types of vegetation habitat on different wetlands. Looking at examples of good vegetation habitat, healthy vegetation habitat, and poor vegetation habitat. And then we've also augmented this with the use of drones at a more local level to get finer resolution to this methodology. And we've developed these methodologies that are able to monitor at a frequent period of time how the healthy bog hopefully kind of extends over time or diminishes, and then thereby monitor are there any significant changes, both good and bad, over time. And I think this will be increasingly, as we go forward, will be a very useful technique to monitor the health of these wetland ecosystems. Thanks.
That's brilliant, Lawrence. And I neglected to say, Lawrence is a colleague here at Trinity College Dublin. He's Professor of Environmental Engineering, and he knows his stuff about fens and water flows. So I'm so glad to hear. And I love, I'm a personal fan of fens, and I think they need a lot more attention. Over to Dr. Emma Gray now. So Emma is a freshwater ecologist at Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. She's going to tell us about her work on the EPA-funded Peat Lakes project, which involves assessing the impacts of climate change and extreme events on lake ecosystems. So Emma, thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So today I'll be giving a quick talk on the importance of peatland lakes. So peatlands contain many freshwater lakes, and Ireland is considered a stronghold for these habitats within Europe due to large areas of blanket bog. So the unique conditions of these lakes mean that they're really important for biodiversity because they support several specialist, rare and threatened species, some of which are pictured behind me. So these water bodies range in size from very small ponds to large lakes, and collectively they can cover a significant proportion of the peatland landscape. We're currently faced with a number of challenges to ensure the long-term protection of these lakes and pools. In general, freshwater biodiversity is declining at a more rapid pace compared to terrestrial ecosystems, and this is exacerbated by climate change, as lakes are directly impacted through increases in water temperature, which may exceed the thermal optima for some of these rare species, but also indirectly by changes in biogeochemical processes within the catchment, which can impact lake water chemistry, which then has knock-on effects for our ecology. Historically, many of these lakes and pools have also been impacted by catchment land uses, such as grazing, afforestation, and peat cutting. As a result, according to the Habitats Directive in Europe, peatland lakes within Ireland have an inadequate conservation status. The small size of many of these water bodies means that they've often been overlooked in legislation, management, and conservation efforts. We're therefore lacking data on their typical physical, chemical, and ecological characteristics. And within Ireland, there are a few lakes and pools within a pristine condition due to catchment land use. This means it's very difficult for us to determine natural reference conditions for chemical and ecological variables, and therefore define conservation and restoration targets. And this is further complicated by climate change, because the baseline on what is considered a good conservation status is constantly shifting. And we need to ensure that our conservation targets are achievable within a changing climate. So what are we doing to help? So as part of the EPA-funded Peatland project, we're currently mapping these water bodies within peatland areas of Ireland to get a better idea of their spatial extent. We're also collecting monitoring data for several of these lakes within Connemara and the Owenduff-Neffin catchment. So we get a better understanding of their characteristics, and this will help us prioritize conservation and restoration efforts. And ultimately, all of this work will help us integrate the conservation goals for these lakes within wider peatland restoration and catchment intervention frameworks. And this will enable the long-term protection of these unique ecosystems. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emma, and really liked your background, but I'm not going to say which background I prefer the best, because we had big arguments about this in our dry run yesterday. So we're going to move over to Ken Byrne. We're going to move over more into the greenhouse gas side of things. So Ken Byrne is Senior Lecturer in Biological Sciences at the University of Limerick. He's a background in forestry and soil science, and he's the first man in Ireland that I ever met talking about carbon way back in the 1990s. His key interests are soil carbon stocks and greenhouse gas exchange in peatlands and forest ecosystems.
Thank you for that, Catherine. Before I begin, can you see my slides okay?
Perfect.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Peatland Pavilion in COP26. I recall being at COP6, which I think was 20 years ago, and the entire land use discussion, well, took place without the mention of peat, or very scant mention of peat. And it's great to see so many people here today, and such a wide interest in peatlands, and peatlands getting their deserved place in this really, really important challenge of biodiversity and climate change. So let me move on. So we've already heard from Ministers Newman and Hackett this morning about, you know, the crucial place that peatlands have played in our social and economic history, and so many of the wonderful things, archaeology and so on, and indeed Tina's outstanding photography about all the things and services they can provide for us. But well, unfortunately, the economic and social need has taken precedence, for understandable reasons, which I think we should understand, but not seek to judge. And we have degraded these landscapes, and I certainly feel that they're so valuable, but they're terribly fragile. And when we damage them, they don't forgive us that sin so readily. And it's difficult to bring them back to where we'd like them to be. They contain about half of our total soil carbon stocks, which is typical of places where there are peatlands. They contain a disproportionate portion of the soil carbon. And invariably, these changes involve removing water from the peat, which we've heard from Paul and Lawrence, that how important water is in these ecosystems. It's the lifeblood of these functioning wetlands, and the statistics bear out there the extent to which we have disturbed, degraded, changed these ecosystems. And John has emphasized the importance of having really valid, up-to-date mapping information about the extent and nature of these impacts. But certainly, I think the numbers here speak for themselves without a doubt. So just the overriding impact in carbon terms of this drainage has been to transform what are carbon sinks over the very long period into carbon sources. And, and we are losing vast amounts of carbon from these ecosystems of the order of millions of tons every year. And there are lots of estimates around, but very, very large numbers and very, very significant component of our national greenhouse gas emissions. So there is an onus on us to reverse this, and our new climate plan, as mentioned earlier, includes this. And we know that re-wetting can slow down these losses. At least our first aim should be to slow them down and hopefully reverse them. And I am delighted to hear Tina make specific mention of patience and the importance of patience in her work, to wait to capture those beautiful images. And patience is needed here too, because these ecosystems cannot be turned around in a short period of time, and we've got to stick with it. And it's great to see such a level of commitment to do that. As a scientist, it would be remiss of me not to mention that the importance of measuring and monitoring and improving the tools we have, and understanding why we are doing that, and to capture reference level emissions, but also emissions across the range of rehabilitation and other measures, and to see how they develop over time. And
with that, Ken, I'm going to have to cut you and ask you to hand over to our colleague,
okay,
Saunders, who's going to, because I know Ken could talk about this for hours. So
well, I won't. Thank you so much.
Move over to Matt, but he knows what he's talking about, and this is the thing. So Matt, please. So Matt is a colleague also at Trinity College Dublin. He's assistant professor in plant ecophysiology, and his research focuses on carbon and greenhouse dynamics to help better understand the impacts of land use management and climate variability, exactly those things that Ken introduced to us. So he's going to tell us about his work there. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, just to follow on from Ken there, I mean, the point there is that large areas of the peatlands we have been degraded, they've been drained, and because of that, they've changed their carbon sink strength, or the greenhouse gas emission profile. But it's important that we start to quantify this to understand the role that both degraded systems and systems that are on the trajectory for rehabilitation can play in terms of climate mitigation. One of the projects that you've heard mentioned already today, the EPA-funded Smart Bog project, and many other projects across the island of Ireland are doing this, and we're using a range of techniques to try and better understand the magnitude of emissions or the potential emission savings that can be made through rehabilitation, but also to better use these techniques to better understand the sorts of eco-physiological and hydrological functions and drivers that really kind of underpin the greenhouse gas dynamics in these systems. So we're using a range of techniques, from eddy covariance towers, as mentioned by Minister Hackett, to measure the ecosystem scale fluxes, chambers to capture the differences in the vegetation and the hydrology and point source emissions, flumes to capture the dissolved carbon losses and the fluvial carbon losses that Lawrence mentioned. And then also linking that with some kind of, more new and novel techniques. So thinking about the use of the Internet of Things and cheaper sensors that can really help our understanding in terms of the driving processes by capturing better temporal or spatial variability of emission dynamics. And then also linking all of this with John Connolly's work in terms of remote sensing, so that we can, at the site perspective, better understand the spatial upscaling of greenhouse gas emissions, but also how we do that at a much larger regional, landscape, and national scale. I think, the other point to mention, and it's really encouraging to see this from a policy perspective, is the support for developing and maintaining a long-term measurement and monitoring infrastructure. We need this, to capture the dynamics, the changing dynamics of rehabilitation over time as these systems change, but also the potential vulnerability and resilience of these systems to climatic variability. Clara Bog was a case in point. 2018 was an extreme climatic year in terms of precipitation, high temperatures, and we saw the system switch then as the water table dropped. The area measured by the flux tower acted as a source of carbon. So that highlights the vulnerability of these ecosystems. In the wetter subsequent years, the system shifted back to act as a sink of carbon. So again, that shows the importance of long-term measurement and monitoring to capture these sorts of dynamics. And I look forward to all of the data sets that will be produced across the island of Ireland in the future that help inform this work.
Thank you, Matt. I think we're really fortunate to have such great people on our team, and the team of Irish Peatlands. And we're going to hear more about work from Galway. Terry Morley is a lecturer in NUIG with over 20 years experience working on wetlands as an ecologist. He's worked in private and public sectors, and he's presently involved in a number of projects. And I was delighted to be out on site with him on Clonkrole Bog in Terce Pass, County Westmeath, my home county, talking about spreading sphagnum with the community. So over to you, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks everyone for attending today. So my research interests are in assessing landscape functions, whether they be hydrological, vegetation diversity, or carbon stores. And last Friday at 1:30 at the Eurosite session, I talked more about some of my research projects that are ongoing. Today, I want to talk and reiterate some of the messages that have been given by my colleagues. We know the majority of our wetlands are in a degraded state. We have a significant proportion of EU peatlands. So with blanket bogs and with raised bogs, and both of these are classified as bad. So that's the bad news. We have some positive news. We have recent rewetting commitments in the order of about 100,000 hectares, right, by large state and semi-state agencies, and that's great. But if you look at my pie chart here that shows the condition of Irish peatlands, most of those that are concerning these 100,000 hectares really will be a minor proportion of the vast majority of that peatland or former peatland landscape. So we have a huge issue to re-wet landscape at scale, and most of the remaining landscapes, aside from these private landowners, are with these large landowners, are with private landowners. So the future of rewetting in Ireland after some of these large landowners will depend on engaging small landowners. So the big question is, how do we tackle this issue of rewetting at scale with a lot of small private parcels? And this will be something significant that we will have to overcome if we're serious about rewetting these peatland areas. It will require a level of partnership then to do that. And I'm encouraged by the minister's additional funding of the Community Wetlands Forum, because they have been one of the leaders in organizing local communities in addition to the Irish Peatland Conservation Council. One of the issues that I've noticed is that locals often feel excluded from the decision-making process. So a partnership or a platform where community groups together with semi-state agencies and scientists can come together to engage and be informed or have informed decision making is crucial. And so that requires not only additional funding from the Community Wetlands Forum, but the establishment of a platform that can bring these groups together in a way like a Peatlands Gathering, but a face-to-face, hopefully. And so we have many of the building blocks to do that, like I said, with the Community Wetlands Forum and the Irish Peatland Conservation Council. And once we engage with the local communities and find these peatland or re-wetting champions, then we have, I think, a great opportunity to start ticking away at reducing some of these degraded peatlands. So thank you.
Yeah, those are really important points. And I think Seamus Boland, who's the chair of the Irish Peatlands Council, will describe, openly how he was one of the ones who fought the cessation of turf cutting. But then, once he could, engage with the scientists and learn why and how. So it's all about a meaningful engagement and really working together. So that's a really important point if we're to deliver this at scale. I'm going to introduce now my colleague Francis. Francis Mackin is a senior associate at RPS Europe. So he's really out there at the front line. He leads a team of engineers and scientists in the development of hydrological restoration plans, undertaking monitoring and modeling to inform management. And I know this man is in high demand across Ireland to help people restore their peatlands. So Francis, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. So I suppose just building on the picture of the information that Paul and Lawrence have really set out, we've done a lot of work over the past number of decades on our peatlands in Ireland, particularly on our raised bogs. And we know that there's a very close relationship between hydrology and ecology. You can see in the image in the top left where we've got peat accumulating active raised bog compared to the image below where we're seeing damaged, degraded raised bog that isn't peat forming. And one of the key differences here is actually the topography. That's one of the key differences that is driving the difference in hydrology. So we've been able to use this information and build a really clear picture of the relationship between topography and ecology. And we've been able to develop eco-hydrological models that help inform the restoration work that we carry out. So we use these models together with information derived from LiDAR to give us really high resolution image, picture of what's going on the bog surface, where the slopes are gentle, where they're more steep. And we develop detailed restoration proposals that are built on this information from the models, together with ecological surveys, hydrological monitoring, and hydrological surveys to develop robust and comprehensive restoration proposals. Over the past number of years, we've put together best practice guidance, and that's something that's continually evolving as we learn more and more about the success and, really importantly, the failures of any of the restoration projects we've been involved in. And recently we've started to look at more enhanced restoration measures, which really look to, optimize the water levels, which is something that Paul and Lawrence really hit on. And we want to optimize the water levels for a range of issues in terms of creating peat forming conditions that will have wider benefits in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity, water quality, and flow regulation. So, finally, I suppose water is the key to the health of our bogs. We need to know where it comes from and where it goes to be able to inform successful restoration strategies. We very much need a multidisciplinary approach for effective restoration, and that's not just between ecologists, hydrologists, engineers, and other peatland scientists, but we really need landowners in the community to get involved in this. And that really is something that Terry very nicely outlined, the real challenge of getting these landowners on board when it comes to these small land parcels. And I suppose finally, something that I would really like to put out there for COP26 at the Peatland Pavilion is it's really important that we learn from our mistakes. And I think that's something that's really important internationally, not just in Ireland. And I think it's something that we really should be placing much more effort on where peatland restoration projects haven't went well, so that we can learn from that and take that forward for more effective results. Thanks, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Francis. And that's really important because we're really just at the beginning, I feel, in terms of understanding these wonderful systems. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ellen. Ellen O'Carroll is an archaeologist working in UCD. I met her on a bog over 20 years ago, and I'm delighted to have been working with her since. She's published widely on cultural heritage. She's also a paleoecologist and looks at past land use from peat layers to help inform future land use. So over to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Catherine. It's an honour to be speaking here at the Peatland Pavilion at COP26. So it's a pivotal time in the history of peatland interventions in Ireland and a critical point at which to discuss the archaeology. A large number of state-owned industrial bogs are now undergoing conservation, re-wetting and rehabilitation, as well as developments such as wind farms. So it really is time to take stock of what we know, what we don't know about the archaeological remains, and decide how best to preserve and manage the cultural heritage in and around our peatlands moving into the future. So these measures are required as the volume of archaeological sites and artefacts from Irish peatlands is really unparalleled anywhere else in the world. A peatland review, which was published in 2013, revealed that 64,000 hectares of raised bogs were walked by archaeologists, and incredibly, over 4,000 archaeological sites have been identified, including a wealth of archaeological objects. These archaeological sites have revealed that for over 10,000 years, humans and peatlands were interdependent. Our peatlands were utilised as areas for economic and social advancement. So an archaeologist working in a dryland environment or dryland condition may be unfortunate to find 10% of what was once there, whereas an archaeologist working in peatlands may find 90% of the material culture of ancient communities. So this can be seen in many of the archaeological remains preserved in these peat bogs, which are represented by, some of them are in behind me there, you can see in the slide behind me, are wooden and stone trackways, which were communication routes connecting people and places. Wooden platforms in the centre of the bog, which were for collecting valuable resources. We have hides, hunting platforms for hunting fauna that our peatlands provide. Peatlands were also ritual and spiritual places where hoards, objects, and even human remains were deposited. And then we have many lake edge settlements also identified at the edge of these peat bogs, our most famous being the early Mesolithic site in Loch Bora in County Offaly. And also peat holds paleoenvironmental records which record our past land use, which can help in determining future land use. So each peat bog is unique. It's a repository of our national cultural heritage and must be mitigated on by a case-by-case basis. So moving into the next phase, or just transition, we need to quantify the remaining archaeological sites present in peat bogs that are to be developed and restored, and develop a mitigation strategy and appropriate guidance to preserve them. This might include a range of approaches, such as the establishment of a collaborative working group to produce guidelines and best practice, resurveys of bogs that are undergoing restoration, re-wetting, active preservation in situ of archaeological remains, and selective excavation based on specific research questions. We also need to do long-term monitoring of these archaeological sites that are being preserved and conserved in our peat bogs. The key point here is that we need a collaborative and comprehensive strategy. It is hoped that the new Instar Plus programme, initiated by National Monuments, Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, will represent a major opportunity for peatland specialists to bring forward projects using the wealth of data collected in order to do existing research, which will place peatlands at the centre of Irish archaeology and worldwide as well. So this collaborative strategy should also take into consideration, which we've heard a lot about today, local communities who've lived, traversed and engaged with the peatlands for many thousands of years. Our wonderful and unique peatland archaeological remains must be considered, treated and mitigated for in a comparable way to any other infrastructural developments during this just transition. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
And thank you, Ellen. And it's a really, it was one of the most powerful messages, I think, at the Peatlands Gathering, you know, that, you know, all the talk seemed to be around climate action, restoration, but what about restoring and acknowledging these peatland artifacts as well? It's really important because it's learning from the past to build for the future. Our next speaker is Neil. I probably took a risk putting him near the end because he might I know he can talk for Ireland. He's going to tell us something about policy and the role of policy. Over to you, Neil. Neil is a project leader at the Insight Centre for Data Analytics at NUI Galway and has many years working in the policy development area and working with the Irish and UK governments. So over to you, Neil. Thank you.
3 minutes, Catherine, I hear you. Just to say hello to everybody in the Peatlands Pavilion and hello to everybody online. It's a great privilege to speak here with so many extraordinary people. Just to say that policy, of course, is quite crucial to the whole thing. In terms of any initiative, I mean, we have a wonderful group of hydrologists, ecologists, climate scientists and archaeologists here today. And it's very, very important that they feed through the bridge of policy, evidence-based policy, to feed into sort of government policy and make sure that things actually happen on the ground. So just a list of some of the major policies that exist in relation to peatlands. Just of note, really, I suppose, is the Global Peatlands Initiative. Tomorrow we'll be talking about a European Peatlands Initiative. And indeed, I believe there's a case, I think in fact the group here is effectively the bones of an Irish Peatlands Initiative, because we need to bring it down to the local, which is hugely important. Just a quick word on Frans Timmermans. I think what he said, you know, as part of the recent discussions on the CAP and the Common Agricultural Policy and so on in Europe, is that in the next years, we will protect wetlands and peatlands, open up new income sources via carbon farming, and begin to redress inequalities in income support. Hugely important statement. There's about 1 trillion euros set aside for the Green Deal. Just quickly, just referring to, I'm not going to go into this in detail, you'll be glad to hear, Catherine, but just to say, you know, we did a full analysis with many stakeholders of over 150 people, you know, in terms of policy gaps, barriers and enablers for policy. Just the key policy items that we discovered, you know, the National Carbon Credits Framework that Pippa Hackett referred to is very important to get right as quickly as possible. Policy on peatland education and indeed facilitating local landowner rewetting. The main barriers seem to be financial and the main enablers seem to be community. So that's really that. But if anybody's interested, we can go into this in more detail. We have lots of reports in this regard. And finally, just the next steps as far as the Care Peat project and ourselves are concerned. People will be aware that the carbon farming framework is coming out. It's announced in the Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Commission. We're Care Peat, in conjunction with Carbon Connects, is putting out a white paper on eco credits in December. The European Peatlands database is very much getting up and running. We will be contributing to that. And polluticulture investigations, again, that's something which very much needs to be looked at in Ireland in a much bigger way. And we'll be running a European policy workshop in 2022, which all of you will be invited to. So thank you very much, Catherine. 3 minutes, I hope.
Thank you very much. And we're really fighting against the time here, but I know they're definitely not going to cut us off with such important messages. I'm going to welcome Paddy Crusher, all the way from Kerry, an ecologist with Wetland Survey Ireland. And I'm going to hand straight over to you, Paddy, because you need no introduction. Mute. Paddy, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, you missed the best bit. Thanks very much, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here presenting at Peatland Pavilion at COP26. In the few minutes I have, I'm going to present a new approach kind of trialed here in Ireland on incentivizing and rewarding farmers through results-based agri-environment payments. I suppose in Ireland, we've got in excess of 300 or in and around 300,000 hectares of farmed peatlands. And these fit into two main categories. I suppose this image here is a good illustration of the Western peatlands, where extensive blanket peat areas going from the lowlands up to the uplands, and they're very much extensively drained or extensively grazed by sheep and cattle or livestock, but they've also been drained to some degree in the past. I mean, that's generally the Western peatlands, so these fit into the category. The other type of peatland is in more the Midlands of Ireland, where you've got the former raised bogs, and these have been converted to grassland areas in many instances. This is in the area around Clara Bog that Paul mentioned earlier on, but these peatlands are farmed much more intensively and have been heavily drained. But between this entire area, I suppose, of farm peatland, they're known to be a massive source of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're, while at the same time also delivering very poor outcomes for biodiversity and water. In a recent climate action plan, which was just published last week, the government increased the area of this farm peatland to be restored or to be less intensively managed by 2030 to about 80,000 hectares. So that's the target that's there. I think it's a very difficult target to reach. There's very many challenges, and work will be very intense over the coming years to achieve that. First of all, the most important thing I think is farmer buy-in. How do we get farmers bought into the program, motivated to actually change their land use practices to get the gains we need? Second big challenge, of course, is the data gaps that are present there. Where is this area of peatland the farm peatland can be restored? How can it be done? And the current condition of it. I suppose we see the next CAP as a massive opportunity to realign policies to ensure better outcomes for peatlands. In the past, there's been many examples of CAP working against the objectives of peatland conservation, and we must strive to reverse this. Government recently announced 1.5 billion to be spent over the next 5 years through agri-environmental initiatives in the next CAP. And these are Pillar 2 payments for those familiar, but a significant proportion of this money will be going towards peatland management. And it's very important that we achieve better outcomes, environmental outputs from this investment by European and Irish taxpayers. And we believe a big opportunity to do this is through results-based payments. It's a very simple concept. At the field level, these peatland plots or former peatland plots are assessed. Score of 0 to 10. 10 gets a higher payment. It's a rapid assessment of the peatland quality. Lower scores get lower payment. So you're only paying for quality results. I could go on, but there's a load of other projects out there operating at the moment, including Pearl Mussel Project, Farm Peat, Wild Atlantic Nature, as referenced by Minister Newman earlier. And these are all working in this space in Ireland. So you can get further information on the operation of these programs at those websites. This whole initiative has really been spearheaded by a suite of European innovation partnerships funded by the Department of Agriculture. And we're working in excess of 3,000 farmers. So it's trialed and tested at this time. And I think it's time now to upscale and mainstream it. Through these locally led projects, we've really been rewarding farmers for their management of peatlands and incentivizing them to improve that. But as well, we've had that on-the-ground engagement, knowledge transfer, and trying to get the farmers on board and motivated to do this work. So we're also building a culture of awareness, I suppose, of the healthy peatlands and ways to farm sustainably in these areas. I think the projects in which farmers can be motivated to provide better outcomes for peatlands, critical that these learnings of these projects are brought forward to inform future policy in Ireland and throughout Europe. Let's use the learnings from these projects. We've also, I suppose, been successful in building the much needed capacity in Ireland for practitioners to be able to advise on the management of these areas. And I think that needs to be further expanded. So that's it. Thanks very much for your time. And I'll hand back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Paddy. And we just have time now for a word from Brian Ledden. And Brian is the chair of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action. And it's really important that we thank you, Brian, for sticking with us. And I hope you've received our message as well. So I'm just going to give you your opportunity to respond.
He's mute.
Brian, you are mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Catherine, and greetings to everybody from the COP26 conference centre in Glasgow. And I'm in a public space here, so I need to wear the mask, and hopefully I won't be interrupted while I'm speaking. You can hear me okay, Catherine, can you? Great, okay, thank you.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so as you mentioned, I chair Ireland's Parliamentary Committee on Environment and Climate Action, and this year we had the privilege of inviting Catherine in to speak on biodiversity in peatlands together with other witnesses. As you've heard, Ireland is a global hotspot for peatlands, and over 20% of our land is either on peaty soils or peatland. And you've heard some of the complexity of peatlands today, the interaction between hydrology and biodiversity, and the importance of peatlands to our heritage and to our culture, and the importance of involving communities in our quest to re-wet and protect our peatlands. Ireland has set itself a challenge of halving its greenhouse gas emissions in less than a decade. We passed the Climate Act this summer to make this target legally binding. And one of the first things Eamon Ryan did under the Climate Act, following advice from our Independent Climate Action Advisory Council, was to define our carbon accounting so that we would fully include land use change and forestry in our national carbon accounting immediately, somewhat earlier than the EU proposal for the middle of the decade. One of the main reasons we did this was to make sure that we were fully accounting for the carbon benefit of re-wetting our peatlands. Ireland has a particular challenge with methane emissions from agriculture, and it was important to be able to say to our farming community that credit for land use emissions, which in Ireland is a net source, would be accounted for. For greenhouse gas emissions consideration alone, it is vital that we undertake an ambitious programme of re-wetting previously drained peatlands. Last week, Ireland published its first climate action plan under the Climate Act, detailing some of the actions that we will take to meet our emissions reduction targets. One of the flagship measures is over €100 million that will be spent re-wetting the bogs in the middle of the country that were previously harvested by the state peat development company, Bordemona. This re-wetting can be described as an acceleration of the natural restoration of the peatlands, blocking artificial drains that were put in to drain the land. And you've already heard about additional measures being planned by the departments of Minister Hackett and Minister Newman to restore our peatlands. But just to be clear, I think there is a common agreement that we need to do more. We need to put more resources towards the restoration of peatlands, and we need to update the various plans and strategies we have around peatlands to reflect a greater ambition. When Catherine appeared before our parliamentary committee, she noted that in the 1940s and 50s, there were many peatland research centres established to figure out how to extract the most economic benefit from our peatlands, and that maybe we need a similar ambition now to improve our data collection and governance to figure out how to extract the most environmental benefit from our peatlands. The committee that I chair will be publishing a report on biodiversity, which includes a significant section on peatlands, which I hope will add to the debate. And it's not just greenhouse gas emissions. As you've heard today, there are so many other benefits to peatland restoration. What we've heard today is evidence of experts working across disciplines, sharing knowledge and perspectives. We do have to bring people with us, and change is always difficult, but we must acknowledge that farmers in particular have been following a state policy that has encouraged them to intensify land use and increase production volumes at lower returns. But peatlands that are rehabilitated in cooperation with communities are peatlands that stand more chance of staying re-wetted. Peatlands are a rich part of Ireland's natural habitat and its human culture. These wonderful, infinitely complex ecosystems will play a very important role in our future if we nurture them sensitively, correctly, and urgently. As an engineer, so many of the presentations spoke to me, whether it was John's presentation on mapping peatlands, or Paul's or Lawrence's and their nuanced explanation of hydrology and the delicate balance that must be achieved, or Ken's on carbon emissions, or I could go on, Matt and Terry, Emma, Ellen, David, Niall, Paddy. Perhaps I've left out some people, but it was really, really fascinating to hear you all. I was furiously...
Brian, I'm going to have to cut you off because I've been warned, just like the typical Irish people, we just don't want the closing time to happen, and we're fighting the tide here. So rather than getting rudely shut off before we get to say goodbye to each other, Brian, apologies, I had cut across you, you were mid-flow. I have to say thank you to everyone, 100 Céad Míle Maithagh Galéir, for especially my friends and colleagues who we've had some laughter on this journey, and we've really enjoyed it, and it's been a truly enriching experience, and I look forward to the next Peatlands Gathering. As I said at the outset, this is a call to action, and we heard that from Malcolm, we heard that from Minister Hackett, Minister Newman, and from Deputy Ledden. We need to recognise more fully the array of values peatlands prevent and how we can work with peatlands for people and planet. And this should mark for us and for Irish peatlands a new beginning. Particularly, I welcome the announcement on the doubling of funding for the Community Wetlands Forum. The phone has been absolutely hopping with tears of joy and excitement at all the work that they're going to do. So thank you, everyone. Berbua ver coibre har an downshaw intak agus Ireland, but Sara ver coibre o gorna bortic specialty, and I wanted to bedazzle people with the wonders of the Irish language to say best wishes in your collaboration for peatlands all across the world. Gormila Malgriff, Slán agus Fannacht. Toga Buggy.